My name is Connor Murphy. I'm part of our healthcare team here at Palo Alto Networks, and we focus specifically on care providers. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can help you safely enable some of the digital transformations taking place, specifically on how we can enable the safe usage of AI for your employees. We're joined today by Chris Mitchell, who is one of our experts in this area, and we'll be walking you through how we do that here at Palo Alto Networks. Chris, would you mind introducing yourself, and we can take it away from there?
Yeah, no, thanks, Connor. My name is Chris Mitchell. I'm part of our go-to-market and strategy teams around all things data security here at Palo Alto Networks. So that would include our next generation CASB platform, data loss prevention, SaaS security posture management, and what we'll be talking about today, AI access security. So yeah, so healthcare organizations today, right? Just like all organizations, everybody wants to use AI, man. Generative AI is the big thing right now. Lots of employees, lots of your colleagues at your organizations want to utilize generative AI for productivity reasons, to be able to make their jobs easier, all those kinds of things, which is great. And of course, I'm sure most everyone on the call is all for that. However, there are considerations to be made around using generative AI within an organization. So, as you can see here, it is quickly becoming, one of the most disruptive technologies out there since sort of cloud computing, hit the scene and things started moving to the cloud, right? And you can see here some of these different articles from the different news sites talking about, just how much AI is kind of taking over the scene here within productivity tools and being able to expand things, especially in healthcare, if you're looking at things like research and development of new drugs or new therapies, right? I mean, AI is the thing that most folks are talking about. And so, if you start looking at generative AI, and we have this report here, and if you take a screenshot or what have you, or maybe we can get that thrown in the chat by the end of the webinar, we've recently introduced or released our State of the Generative AI report, right? And you can get that on our website, right? If you just go to paloaltonetworks.com and you can just search for State of Gen AI 2025, you can download the report and kind of read through it and see all the different things that we found just with our research around generative AI. But you could just see a few statistics here I put here on the screen that are from the report that were really interesting. That generative AI traffic has surged over 890% in 2024, right? And so obviously that's a lot, right? As soon as this stuff has hit the market, everybody's wanting to use it, right? And so if you look at an average organization, and I've actually got a couple of things here specific to healthcare, an average organization uses 66 generative AI applications, right? And those are sort of sanctioned, right? A lot of times, right? We're not really talking about the unsanctioned stuff that people are using that you don't really know about, right? And so we'll kind of go into how we can help you deal with that later here in the webinar. But 10% of generative AI applications are classified as high risk, right? Just even in our catalog of what's available through our products, we have over 2,000 different generative AI applications that we use or that we know of, right? That we can help you get visibility and control into. So, and the thing with generative AI applications is there's new ones popping up all the time, right? It's kind of like the SaaS applications. And once cloud came around, right, SaaS applications exploded and everybody started using SaaS applications for productivity, and that became a problem as well. And so generative AI is very similar to that, except, we got some different things we have to think about and consider when using generative AI. Writing assistants are the dominant use case, right, for generative AI right now. Fairly simple, right? But, everybody wants to make sure that their presentations and their documents and things are written properly and there's no grammatical errors and things like that. And so, writing assistants currently seem to be the most popular use case for generative AI. And then, of course, Grammarly leads that usage, followed by, Microsoft 365 Copilot, because I'm sure a lot of companies out there on this webinar, you guys are using, Office 365 as your main collaboration platform. And so Copilot, is a part of that, right? And so, the problem with AI, right, is that, our adversaries are seeing the same promise in AI, right? So, it's taking like, hours, right, from compromise to exfiltration of data, right? The Wall Street Journal had an article about this and the risk around, the bad guys using generative AI to write ransomware, right, to other types of malware type things, being able to sort of, morph and manipulate malware on the fly, or have it, change and modify itself, right, based on different conditions within the areas that it's been infiltrated into. So, between the speed of AI, the scale of that, and then the scope, right? So some of the other issues that are part of the concern of generative AI. We're not really going to talk about some of these today within this webinar, but we do have some others available later that we'll talk about how to protect sort of your generative AI models, the things that you're using in your environment, in your private applications, right? We do have some solutions around that as well to help that type of protection. But prompt injection is one of the big things you have to be concerned with when you're using these large language models and generative AI within your private applications that you may have developed for different reasons within your organization. And so there's lots of different issues that arise by using either commercial generative AI applications as an end user going somewhere, to an application on the internet, or actually your development teams, using these large language models within your own private applications to enhance productivity, deliver better customer care, customer service, those types of things. So there's a lot of considerations around that. And so, we're here to help you win that fight, right? Within Palo Alto, one of the things that we have as top priority within our organization is securing AI by design, right? So anything that we're using from an AI perspective, and then as well as helping our customers secure that AI by design, in the sense that, hey, when you build, say, a private application, or you're utilizing commercial application for generative AI, we're going to help you secure that in a manner that is embedded into the design of, say, your networks or your applications development life cycles, your processes there to build those private applications. We're also embedding our AI across our portfolio, right? So we're using AI in many different spots, and we'll talk about how we're using some of that specifically today within our AI access security and data loss prevention products. And then we're also, radically simplifying security around that thing too, because what we can do with generative AI, and you'll see some of this as well within the product set, is giving you suggestions, right? Analyzing the data, right? That you guys are collecting, your logs, your different, things that you're doing within your organization that we have access to be able to simplify and give you, a co-pilot, right? That can give you recommendations on how to reduce your risk and secure your environment without you having to do all the research and legwork and analysis and things like that to figure these things out. We can give you that information at a moment's notice, right, as a part of our ongoing analysis of your traffics, let's say, in your network, or use of AI within your organization. We can help you secure that very quickly and easily. So we do need to, we believe that you do need to secure AI by design, right? So, tracking and monitoring AI usage for every employee, that's a big thing, right? And that's where AI access security comes into play, right? Because you need to understand which applications people are using, understand what those applications, not only what they do, but how they interact with your end users, what security tools they have in place within their application, what other processes and controls they have within their organization, right, to ensure that your data is secure if you happen to, share that data with that particular application. Things like compliance standards, right? Privacy statements, how do they handle your data? And then how do those applications themselves, those generative AI applications, actually use the data that's input into those, right? And so we'll give you all that information as part of the generative AI access catalog that we have of all the applications, right? So you guys can understand that and make a better decision on which generative AI applications you want to sanction in your environment, and the things that you are allowing folks to use, and putting guardrails around that, versus the ones that, maybe this thing is too risky. This is a relatively new application. Maybe we don't want to use that within our environment because there's just inherently too much risk in using that application. Now, securing every step of that development process as well, right? Again, we'll talk about that in a different webinar, but suffice it to say, things like our AI runtime security, right, would help you secure those internal applications, right? Making sure that as you're developing applications in your environment, right, and using that those AI tools and things like that, those steps within your process are also secure. And then lastly, protecting the data from unauthorized access and leakage, right? So there's a couple of different things, with that, right? So protecting AI from unauthorized access within your private applications and making sure that, prompt injections and things like that don't accidentally disclose data. But the other aspect of this too, with the track and monitor, is making sure that the data that you do have isn't input into the wrong commercial generative AI applications that your employees are using, again, to increase productivity and things like that. But again, you don't necessarily want that sensitive data to be put into those generative AI applications because those models that they use could learn off of your data and subsequently disclose that data to other users of that same application without your knowledge. So there's a couple of different aspects around securing that data. And we'll walk through sort of how we're going to do that on the commercial application side during this webinar. Okay. So 50% of employees use public generative AI apps weekly, right? And so we found this is part of an article published by ZDNet in February. But, and I see this every day in my interactions with customers and looking at their environments, is that, everybody wants to use generative AI. And, unfortunately, a lot of employees, again, they're what I would consider, or what we kind of call in the data security space, the well-meaning insider, right? They're out there, they're trying to do their job. They just want to be productive. They find a cool application that they can interact with, that they like, they can be productive. And, they're not really thinking about any security implications or, anything like that that could be bad, right? They're just looking at, hey, I'm trying to do my job and I'm trying to do my job better. And so your employees are relentlessly using those generative AI applications to increase their productivity. And they're just not really, in tune with all the security nerds and, all the different bad things that could happen by using these different generative AI applications. So it's a very, very top of mind thing around security. Professionals, I'm sure everyone on the webinar is, when I talk to CISOs and things like that, this is typically the top thing on their list of trying to secure, and CIOs, and even this goes to the board level, in the publicly traded companies and the other companies that have governance boards or other corporate boards with the executive teams. They are very, very concerned about not only how can generative AI help the organization, right, and do things better and more efficient and things like that, but also, again, how to protect the data, have the appropriate use of generative AI. It doesn't get out of hand, it doesn't get out of control, and it also doesn't have any sort of security implications to the organization. So expect at least 6 high-risk generative AI applications, right? So, generative AI applications, they're really, considered high risk when they pose significant, threats to security, right? Obviously. So, that may be, hey, this tool maybe is susceptible to different threats or attacks. Again, compliance standards, right? Well, maybe this application, again, the vendor, okay, they're brand new to the company. Maybe they're a startup. They're just trying to get out there and, showcase what they can do with their particular application. But they hadn't really been around long enough to really go through rigorous compliance standards that a lot of companies expect the companies that they partner with or the vendors that they use for their software. They don't really have those compliance standards. Obviously, within healthcare, healthcare information protection is a big, big thing, right? And needing to know that these application vendors adhere to HIPAA and they understand HIPAA standards and they know how to use that and what that all entails and everything that goes along with that. You as a security practitioner or compliance folks or whoever's attending the webinar today, you guys need to know that, right? You need to be able to understand, like, hey, does this company that we're doing business with have these kind of standards? Do they comply with those? Do they have the right privacy in place, right? Is their legal statements and their privacy statements and the things that they disclose about how they handle certain types of data, like, is that aligned with the standards that you expect and require from the application vendors and software vendors that you're using within your organization, right? So again, most employees, they're not looking at that. They don't know about that. They don't understand those things, or maybe they understand it at a very high level, right? And so the unfortunate part is, again, they're using these applications for productivity. They're using them to just help them do their job, and they don't really understand the risk involved with using these applications, right? So some of the other key factors that include, that you increase risk is obviously sort of how that data, how the data is consumed by the application. Like, can you upload files to it? Is it strictly just, typing in prompts, right? How does that also generate responses? Is it just prompts, again, or does it generate some sort of artifact that can be downloaded, right? What's the implications of that download? I mean, could there be like bad things, in that model that we don't know about that could turn into potential malware or something like that that an end user would download, from those applications, right? Does that user data and the data that that user submits into that application, does that vendor use that data to train its models, right? I mentioned that earlier. Like a lot of these applications do, and it's very nuanced depending on the application vendor. Is it a free version? Is it a paid version? Where you're accessing that particular application from? Are you in Europe? Or are you in North America? Are you in South America? Or are you in Asia? Like, and the governance and laws in those different regions, all of that can affect sort of whether that application will learn from the data that's put into it or not, right? And so that can all, obviously factors in risk in using those things. And of course, adherence to various regulatory requirements that we've talked about earlier. And again, things like authentication, data privacy, encryption, like, can we integrate this application with our, SAML tool, or can we do SSO and tie that into our organization if we're, paying for this application, right? So can we consume that in a similar manner that we do other SaaS applications that we're using today in our organization? So all of those things factor into risk, and again, whether or not you want to use these generative AI applications and making good choices, right? As far as the generative AI applications that you use. And so you can see here we've got a part. This is again a snippet out of our report that I referenced earlier, but we're talking about, high risk generative AI applications by industry and block rate. And so I wanted to call out healthcare, right? That's number 6 on the list. And the average number of high risk applications, right, that healthcare organizations use is 8.1, right? So you guys on the call, if you actually kind of dig into this stuff and start using our tool, or even somebody else's tool, right, to understand this, shadow IT and shadow AI governance processes that are going on, when you start looking at these applications, you can probably expect to see at least 8 different high risk applications that people are using in your environment, right? Again, they're well-meaning insiders more than likely. They're just using these things to do their job, and they just think it's cool and they like the application without understanding all the inherent risk involved with those applications. And so you can also see here on the screen the top 10 generative AI applications that are blocked, right? And so probably one of these 10 applications is probably being used in your environment for some reason, again, by someone who's just, again, trying to utilize the app and trying to use their job, do their job. So some of the lessons learned, from securing this employee AI usage, right? So, secure coding, co-pilots, things like this. This is all about sort of your internal applications, right? And then also securing that LLM access, right? So, having that AI security broker, having a way to be able to control not only which applications people can access, but also having controls in place with those particular AI applications that you're using within your environment, within your private applications, is critical in making sure that you can use generative AI safely and actually be productive, and lowering the risk. So what we're going to be talking about today, here in just a couple minutes, we'll go through the demo quite a bit, so you guys can kind of understand what AI access security is, right? So AI access security is a new product offering, a relatively new product offering from Palo Alto Networks. It really is a subset of sort of our inline CASB product set that we can also talk a little bit about while we're on the call. But what AI access security does is giving you sort of that view into generative AI, what applications people are using within your environment, right? The top applications that folks are using, understanding the use cases around these applications. So one of the cool thing about this is we've mapped all these generative AI applications that we have in our catalog to use cases, right? Because again, there's so many of these generative AI applications out there today, and a lot of times it's like, well, what are they using this for? Like, what does this thing do? Like, we have no idea what this generative AI application does, much less any sort of risk that might be involved in using it, right? So we've given you use cases like a conversational chat agent or code assistants and code generators or image generators or audio generators, right? Those types of things so you guys can get a better understanding of, oh, okay, well, my marketing team's using a lot of video editors and video generation AI applications, for their marketing efforts, right? Well, okay, let's make sure we pick one that's low risk, right? We just don't want different people in our different teams just randomly using these applications because they think they're cool, right? We have to really understand the risks involved in using those and making sure that we, pick the right applications for those teams to use. So, we have all the visibility, so you'll get that, real time. You'll be able to see that data because we're collecting that data as the data traverses your Palo Alto firewall infrastructure or your Prisma Access infrastructure. So you'll be able to see that in real time. Comprehensive data protection. So our enterprise DLP product is also a part of AI access security. So you'll get, world-class enterprise DLP detection methods within any of these generative AI applications that we support. Then you'll be able to, understand the types of data that's going to these applications, blocking the sensitive data that you don't want going to these applications, right? Coaching end users on, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, right? Maybe this is not the best decision in the world, right? And helping them understand, what not only what applications to use, but also what types of data should be allowed and put into models and which ones should. And then, of course, access control ultimately is what we're trying to do here. And, keeping individuals from accessing the applications that you do not want them to access, maybe putting limitations and certain controls on certain applications for the inevitable one-offs or exceptions that you might have within your organization, right? And being able to apply granular controls and granular policies to these applications to again facilitate productivity, and then also keeping the risk low. And then, of course, being able to obviously let people access the sanctioned applications and the things that you want them to use, right? And then not impeding with that use of those applications and impeding their productivity, right? So with that, we'll kind of get into the demo. And so when we talk about AI access security, again, this is a product set that is integrated within our platform, right? You probably heard the Palo Alto platformization discussions out there, and maybe some of the different webinars and things that you've attended within the different Palo Alto things that we publish out there on the internet. But this is a part of our platform, right? So in our world, being able to inspect this traffic, getting this visibility and control is inherent to PAN-OS, right? So when we're talking about generative AI and AI access security, what you're getting is additional app IDs and additional visibility into the generative AI applications, as well as additional controls. But from an implementation perspective, it's very, very easy to implement. It's very easy to be able to turn these subscriptions on in your existing Palo Alto infrastructure without having to do radical changes to your network, or the burdens of installing additional agents on machines, or changing the way you're doing your security today with respects to things like, threat protection or URL filtering or anything like that. You can continue to do all those things within your Palo Alto environment today. And, simply, again, adding this functionality and adding subscriptions to your existing platform. But here within the AI Access dashboard here, this is part of Strata Cloud Manager, right? So, if you guys have seen Strata Cloud Manager before, been exposed to this, probably most of you have. If you're, Palo Alto customers, right? This is our new cloud management platform that we're using for many different products that we have on the network side of the house, right? Things like Prisma Access, our next generation firewall platforms, our CASB suite of products, as well as all the different add-ons and additional subscriptions and functionality that you can get within the product set. Say, our ADEM utilities for our access experience, for, helping end users application performance better, our SD-WAN products, right? And understanding and controlling the SD-WAN or the administration of those tools. And again, even our hardware firewall platforms, right? So you can now manage hardware firewalls with Strata Cloud Manager. Maybe, hey, you've been using Panorama for years, and maybe it's time to kind of move on from Panorama on-prem and get into more of a cloud managed scenario and a unified platform. So, that's what Strata Cloud Manager brings to the table. And so again, part of that is our AI access security. And then again, with our dashboards, you'll see things here like, hey, here's the top use cases, right? First, second, third, and fourth of use cases around the generative AI applications that people are using, right? You'll understand not only, hey, this is the top use case, writing assistant, right? As we saw in our report, but you'll also see the other number of applications that fall into this same use case. This is the top, application that's being used in this case in our demo environment is Grammarly, right? But there's 23 other applications as well within that fall into the writing assistant bucket that folks are using within your organization, and also being able to see the number of users that are being used that are using each of these individual applications in these use cases, as well as just how many users are using generative AI applications in total, right? So you're getting all this information here. The nice thing about all this information is it's just coming from your logs, right? That we're automatically producing and collecting as part of our platform. The user information is coming from things like Cloud Identity Engine or User ID, those other pieces of the Palo Alto frameworks and platforms that allow you to integrate, users and groups and things like that, and building those firewall policies probably that you're doing today on user and group basis as well. That just dovetail straight into AI access security, right? So you can continue to build the policies that you're used to building, right? There's no changes in how you build policies or how you utilize things. And you can use any of the other features of the platform to, help secure that AI access security and help you secure that the AI access that your end users want to do. I'd mentioned earlier how we're using sort of generative AI within our product set. So as you can see, and I mentioned earlier that we have copilots, right? So our copilots are going to give you recommendations on what you need to do within your environment, right, to help cut down that risk, right, and give greater security into these applications, right? So in this demo environment, hey, maybe you should enable DLP inspection for some of these allowed generative AI applications. Maybe you should review the generative AI plugins, right? We'll talk about that here in a second, because not only does AI Access Security have integrations with things like our firewalls and Prisma Access platform, we've also got integrations with Enterprise Chat GPT, right? Enterprise Chat GPT is the first generative AI vendor to open up their APIs for API CASB vendors, right? To be able to hook into and get that visibility and control inside, your sanctioned, your tenant of ChatGPT. If you've got organizations out there who have, bought that for your use internally, right? So we can tie into that via APIs and our API CASB functionality to help you understand that, as well as plugins, right? So one of the things a lot of customers aren't aware of is that your SaaS applications, like your, Microsoft Office tenant or your Google tenant or your Atlassian tenant for things like Jira, Confluence, things like that, those applications have marketplaces, right? And those marketplaces have different little applications, plugins, if you will, right? Sometimes folks refer to this as API to API communications, right? But they're plugins, they are applications that an end user can go out to the marketplace and say, hey, this is really cool. Like I want to use this in, while I'm typing up Word documents. Maybe I don't like Office Copilot, right? Maybe that's not something that I'm not cool with it. Like it's not, it's not my jam, right? I want to find something else. And so they go to these marketplaces and grab these plugins and install them into your Office tenant. And a lot of times the Office administrators or the security teams don't realize that those applications have been installed into the tenant. And so we're going to give you that visibility into that here, and we'll show that here in a second. But this Copilot here is helping you understand those things, right? And giving you suggestions about how to do that kind of stuff, right? So again, you'll be able to see that. And just kind of for the sake of time, I'm going to jump some tabs here instead of drilling down just to make things a little easier. But, when you dive into a particular SaaS application or generative AI application in this case, this is the type of information that we give for all the different generative AI applications in our catalog. So, again, we're going to kind of pick on Grammarly today. But this is the free version of Grammarly, right? So we do distinguish business versus free in our App ID catalog. But you can see here when you click on a particular application, right, that is being used in your environment, this is the sort of the data that you'll get, right? So obviously we'll explain to you, okay, this is what this application does. This is what it is, right? We can give you risks, sort of the ports that it uses, any kind of rules that you may have already created to control Grammarly, right? Obviously, categories, application IDs, subcategories, a lot of the things that you're used to, seeing from our Applepedia and our App ID catalogs that you're probably utilizing today on the Firewall platform. But the nice thing about this as well is we give you attributes. So we have roughly 73, I think, attributes that we publish for all of the generative AI applications. And actually, a lot of these attributes are also published for our SaaS applications as well within our inline CASB product, our SaaS inline product. So, a lot of these attributes overlap, but we do also have generative AI specific attributes. So you can see here in the case of this, we're going to give you as much information as our human intelligence, right? All of this information is garnered by our and curated by our content teams, right? So real human beings are getting this information with the help of some generative AI stuff, but we are gathering this information for you and then, continuously updating our catalogs. But you'll be able to see again these different things as far as, hey, this is the tags and the content types, the domain names, et cetera, right? What this thing does. But as you scroll down, you can also see generative AI attributes, right? So for every generative AI application, we're going to give you this type of information around those apps. Like, hey, how do you input data into the app? How does it, give you data back out, right? What use cases does it fall into, right? In this case, enterprise copilots, right? How can you consume it, right? And then again, I think this is probably the most important attribute that we produce within the product is, hey, does this application use the data that's put into it to train their models? Different applications have different policies on that. Like I say, a lot of the free versions of these applications, they do the model training, right? That's why they're free, right? You're kind of giving them free information to train their models and make their models better. I'm going to pick on Grammarly just for a second because Grammarly is a great example of this. So the free version of Grammarly, it uses your data, right? So when your end users just say, hey, I'm just going to go use Grammarly because, my neighbor said it was really cool and he used it at his work, and I think I'm going to use it in my work, and they don't really know, right? So they just go use the free version of Grammarly. Hey, but this thing is going to use the data that's input into it to train its models. But now let's say you guys buy Grammarly, you get the business version of Grammarly. Maybe there's a lot of talk in your organization, and everybody's like, "Hey, we really love Grammarly. Like, we want to use Grammarly." Well, okay, well let's go buy a subscription to Grammarly, right? You can do that. The business version of Grammarly, they don't use the data that's input into the business version of Grammarly to train the models, right? So it depends on whether you're using the free or the business version. Now, for our folks that maybe have locations or are located in the EU, well, the free version doesn't learn when you're accessing Grammarly from the EU because of GDPR and that regulatory environment within the European Union, right? Grammarly doesn't learn from data that's input into the free version, right? Because of the region's compliance and laws, governing privacy and compliance, right? So that's sort of the illustration that I like to make to customers is depending on its, what ifs, ands, or buts are, within the generative AI applications, terms and conditions when you buy these applications, when you just use them, when you just grab them off the internet, where you're at in the world, that all factors into whether or not the data is being used to train their models. So, as you can see, it can be confusing, right? It's a lot of stuff to figure out. And so we're giving you that as part of that value add within our product set. Okay. Also, you can see things like, does it allow fine tuning? Does it have a marketplace, right? Going back to those plugins, things like that. Does it have some security guardrails? It does. And you can click in on this to see that. Right. Now, the next section here is security and privacy features. Now, this is something that we give and the attributes that we give to all of our SaaS applications within our inline CASB product set. But you'll see things like, hey, do they have an audit log? Is that data encrypted in transit? Do they have a policy on third-party data sharing, right? Are they protected from downgrade attacks, right? And you guys can read the rest of this, session timeouts, encryption, right? But these are all the security and privacy features of their application and like what they're doing with your data. Same thing for identity and access management, right? So we talked about this earlier. Like, hey, if we want to use this application, Maybe if it's free or buy, maybe we buy it, maybe we use the free version, whatever the case is. Like, doesn't have things like RBAC controls or MFA, right? Abilities, right? Password policy, SAML, right? Because inevitably I hear folks all the time very, very concerned about, well, hey, what if my employee goes out to this free generative AI application and signs up for it and uses their corporate email credentials, right? That's a concern to a lot of folks. And so we can help you, get an understanding of how you can integrate your identity with that, right? And even with things like our Prism Access browser, right? I'm not going to talk a lot about Prism Access browser today, but Prism Access browser is also integrated with generative AI and our AI access security, right? So all of this information, all the cloud delivered security services that fall within the AI access security bucket are also available within the Prism Access browser, DLP, all the other threats and security features and things like that that we deliver to our firewalls are now available within Prism Access browser, right? And one of the cool things about Prism Access browser is I can limit which applications my corporate credentials can be used in, right? So that's a policy that we can attach to the browser, right, to help you further secure this generative AI usage by not letting them use their corporate credentials in applications that you don't deem sanctioned. Okay. And then lastly, we talk about compliance standards, right? And of course, HIPAA is on this list, right? But again, these are the compliance standards that we can verify, right? And you can see that Grammarly does comply with HIPAA, that we can verify with our human intelligence teams. Like, does this vendor possess any of these compliance standards, or do they outright state that they comply with these standards in their things like their privacy statements, other things that they publish as a part of their due diligence around their application, right? So, in this case, Grammarly, uh, COPA, Privacy Shield, SOC 2, right? Some of these things we can verify independently, like a SOC 2 cert, right? That we can get that from SOC. And SASE 18, ISO 27000s, right? We can get some of this stuff, without having to get that from the vendor itself. But some of these things have to be disclosed with the vendor, right? So we're giving you, again, this information that we can tell you, like, hey, we found that yes, they do comply with these standards. So again, this all factors into making a better decision on which generative AI applications you want to use. And then lastly, we've just recently added this of quantum readiness, right? So this is basically, talking about quantum computing and their quantum status, right? So how does some of these things factor in and considered, quantum secure, right? And so this is a new attribute that we've added to all of our applications, frankly, not just generative AI, but you'll be able to understand, if this is something that you guys are starting to look into and factoring into your decisions on application usage, right? Quantum readiness is a new thing out there that we are also giving you that information as far as their status is concerned. Okay. Now we do that again for all these applications. And some of the other things that you'll see here in the dashboard is, hey, how many threats have been targeted to this particular application, in my environment? How many users are using this over time? How much data transfer has been going through there, right? Sensitive data. So, has there been any DLP events associated with this particular application? And also Prism Access browser events, right? Whether they're data events or access events. All this information is collected within Strata Cloud Manager to help you guys understand, how things are going over time, all the risks and threats and things that are happening to these AI applications, so you guys can better secure your environment. So I'm going to jump over to the next tab for threats, right? So this is what the threat scene would look like, right? So when you drill into the threats window there in the AI Access dashboard, you'll be able to see all the different threats that are targeted, the unique threats. And of course, this is a demo environment, so we have a lot of ICAR files and things like that that we're uploading to kind of generate data. But again, this would give you that visibility into those threats and understand how threats are being targeting the AI applications that you're using. SaaS Security Posture Manager, right? So I mentioned the plugins earlier. So when you click on the plugins, I mentioned that, hey, some of these applications have marketplaces, right? And within these marketplaces, there are generative AI applications, right, that an end user can install, right, within say, your office tenant, right? They can go out there to the marketplace, they can say, hey, I want to use this generative AI tool. It plugs directly into your office tenant, and then they start using that application. And again, a lot of times you may not know that an end user has hit these applications, they're installed these applications, and they're using these applications, right? So a lot of the same things apply to these plugins as maybe their SaaS application counterparts, right? Does the application use data in their model training, right? What kind of access does it have? What kind of compliance standards, right? All that kind of stuff, right? And so we correlate all that with these plugins, just like we do the SaaS applications and the generative AI applications, to help you sort of understand, okay, what applications are people using? Who installed this? Was it an administrator who did it, where maybe it's a sanctioned thing that, hey, everybody has access to this particular plugin in our office tenant, or, was it Bob in accounting who decided to install this thing? The other risk around all these plugins, regardless if they're generative AI or not, is that typically when they install these plugins, some sort of additional permission set is granted to that user, through that user ID context for that application to do what it needs to do, right? So what unfortunately happens is, when Bob in accounting decides to, install Typerface or Reclaim AI or whatever the plugin is, typically that user ID now has elevated permissions within your tenant just so that application can function, right? And so now, if that user ID ever got compromised, right, that could be a problem, right? Because now that user ID actually has elevated permissions into your office tenant, right? So there could be potential for problems there, right? So as you get these different applications, you can see these things depending on the SaaS application, right? So this is done via similar to CAT API CASB, right? So these are APIs and things that we're talking to directly with the applications. So depending on those applications and their functionality, you may be able to remediate these and uninstall these applications directly from SaaS Security Posture Management. Or if the vendor doesn't allow us to do that, right, we do have ticketing integration within our posture security tool with things like ServiceNow and Jira. So you could put in a ticket, right, and have that ticket routed maybe to your office team or Atlassian team, whoever administers the cloud application within your organization, to have these plugins removed. The other piece that we've recently introduced, actually, this is fairly brand new within our SaaS security posture management tool set when we're talking about generative AI, is meetings, right? So one of the other things about collaboration tools, right? That's a big thing right now with AI bots that are being used within, say, your Teams environment or your Zoom environment, like we're using here on our webinar, or Google Meet, right? So we support those three collaboration tools today. But what happens is, again, those end users are like, hey, man, I'm going to turn Assembly on, right? Whatever that is. I'm not even really familiar with that AI bot. But the point is, these bots do things like, obviously, they transcribe the meetings, right? They put them in the text. They might analyze things, take notes for people, all kinds of different things that, again, ultimately have access to your data, right? The spoken word in this case within the Teams and Google Meets and things like that, as well as taking notes. So again, sensitive data is a concern. Right now, these applications have access to sensitive data. Not really something you think about a lot when you're talking about a transcription, right? It's like, oh, wow, I didn't really think about that. When I'm starting to talk about sensitive things within a meeting and it's being transcribed into text, that's also getting fed into their model, right? So we've recently introduced this to help you guys secure your meeting environments, right? When you're talking about things like a Zoom or a Teams or what have you, and making sure that the right generative AI applications are being used if you want to allow, end users to be able to have that productivity and that functionality within those tool sets. Okay. And lastly, and we'll have it open up for questions here in just a minute, but we'll talk about our data loss prevention and how it relates to generative AI. So, again, when you click on the sensitive data events within that AI access security dashboard, it will take you into our DLP console, right, where you can understand, hey, here's all the data in motion events. You can see all the different people that have been using the different applications. So, in this case, it's already pre-filtered for you for generative AI applications only. So I can see, oh, wow, well, ChatGPT is like the biggest application that sensitive data events have occurred. I can click in here and I can actually see that here within our nice little wheel and show you all the different sensitive assets. I can actually drill into things like data in motion to understand, hey, this is the network incidents that happen to have occurred, the end users that are doing those, right? So you'll be able to drill into these different aspects of data and ultimately get into your different incidents here, so you can see, hey, here's my DLP incidents over time here. In the case of our demo system, right, maybe this is Prisma Access, or we can look at email DLP or endpoint or what have you. But we can also obviously tie those things back to the applications that are being used, right, and understanding sort of how these applications which applications, I should say, are sensitive data events occurring into, right? Understanding where those things are, obviously taking action on that sensitive data and blocking, say, an upload into a particular generative AI app or a put post that was, maybe put into a prompt, right, with sensitive data information. So, our DLP service, again, with all our different detection methods, just to kind of quickly go over that, we support things like data dictionaries. We have our own built-in patterns, right? And one of the other cool things about our regular expressions and our built-in patterns is most of those now are ML based, right? So what we're doing is, traditionally, I'm an old data security guy. I've been around the DLP world for a long time. Traditionally regular expressions are just that. They're regular expressions. They can be prone to false positives, right? Because I mean, a regex is only so good, right? So, a 9-digit number might not always be a social security number, right? But there is an algorithm, right, that the Social Security Administration in the US, in any event, has that, makes a social security number a social security number. So, right, so we're using ML on the back end to do validation on those regular expressions, right? And what we're doing there is really trying to reduce false positive rates, right? Because that's kind of the thing with regular expressions sometimes is there's prone to false positives, right? So we're using ML in our predefined patterns to reduce those false positive events, right, within the pattern set. We're also using the ML models and things like our index document match. We call it document types. But old school DLP, a lot of times you had to just upload multiple examples of similar documents for it to be able to get an algorithmic sort of model of the type of form data, or like a boilerplate contract, or these types of documents that you wanted to find derivatives of throughout your organization. We had to keep uploading and keep training and make sure, oh, okay, this algorithm has finally figured out enough to where after uploading 20 examples, now it can kind of figure out, an 80% match to a similar document, those kinds of things, right? Within our tool set, we're using use one example of that document, and we're using that to train the models to be able to essentially do that same thing, right? So we're making things much more efficient and much more accurate when it comes to looking at derivatives of forms data as well as documents within your organization using machine learning. And then lastly, we have trainable classifiers within our DLP service. And again, all these things are available for all the AI applications that we support. But trainable classifiers are used for intellectual property, right? So if you have intellectual property within your organization that you want to protect, you can actually train your own model, right, to detect those specific things. I like to use source code as an example. Lots of organizations, healthcare and otherwise, develop different applications for usage. You might consider that source code to be sensitive, right? And you may consider that intellectual property, right? So, it's one thing for a DLP solution to detect that it's source code, right? That's easy. That's a regular expression. Oh, yeah, that's C++ code, or that's Python code, or whatever. That's not a problem. The issue is, well, do I care about that code? Like, is that something that's I consider intellectual property? Or is that something that one of my developers grabbed off some public GitHub repository to change a button from green to blue, right? Just to save that developer time in their development process, right? So it's hard to determine if the code snippet, as an example, is sensitive or not. With a trainable classifier, I can actually upload examples, positive and negative training documents, where I'm uploading examples of my source code, the stuff that I consider intellectual property, and then uploading all that GitHub data or whatever that source code snippets are that I don't care about, right? That are the code snippets that turn things from red to blue, or it's a reusable module that lots of my applications in my organization may use that I don't care about because it's not my intellectual property. So I can train that model to tell the difference in that source code, right? To know, hey, this is intellectual property source code. I want to protect that source code versus, yeah, I don't really care about that stuff because it's just things that we use in our day-to-day development environment to make our lives easier, right? So that's how we're using these types of generative AI and machine learning and large language models within our products to help you guys be more productive, more efficient in your security processes. Because we all know that, security is a big thing. It's a big job. There's lots of things to do, not a lot of time, not a lot of resources, available in those spaces. So anything that we can do on our end to help you guys be more efficient and be able to actually find the threats and the things that are meaningful to you and kind of get rid of the noise is something that we're striving to do within all of our product set. So I hope you enjoyed this quick sort of brief overview of AI access security. I'm going to turn it back over to Connor here, but you can certainly reach out to any of your Palo Alto sales teams, representatives, if you would like to get a more in-depth demo and discussion around generative AI access security, how we can secure your environment, maybe our broader CASB solution as well, broader DLP solutions, right? But you can always reach out to your Palo Alto representatives or even your partners, right? So if you're using partners, they can get in touch with Palo Alto to get you the information that you'd like to have. We can set up proof of concepts, demos, all that kind of fun stuff to give you guys the way to kind of kick the tires and see if our AI access security product is right for you. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Connor. I don't know if there was any questions or anything. I haven't looked at in the chat, but we'll be certainly glad to answer a few questions here with the time remaining.
I'm not seeing any questions right now, Chris, but really appreciate that overview. So as a quick little recap, as we mentioned, your employees are using AI and they're getting around the manual roadblocks. Boards and CEOs also want their employees to get the productivity of benefits of AI. So the goal for us is not to block all AI, but rather safeguard the safe adoption of AI. So at Palo Alto Networks, AI security, as Chris mentioned, it's integrated into our platform, and we're going to allow your team to safely accelerate AI adoption by giving your team full real-time visibility of AI usage across your organization, comprehensive DLP, and also granular control and the ability to apply AI-specific security policies. So as Chris mentioned, if you have any more questions, reach out to your local account team. And if you haven't been connected, feel free to reach out to my email. I'm listing that in the chat now. This webinar is a part of a healthcare-specific webinar series targeted at the challenges that care providers face and how we help healthcare teams solve them. So keep an eye out in the future for more healthcare-specific webinars just like this one. We appreciate all your time today, and thanks again to Chris. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.